This will start the session and then Lucy will speak and your other list.
Okay.
Okay. So, first, thank you for everything that you shared. I have a question about, I've heard yesterday and today, I heard you mention the educational revolution, that we need an educational revolution to make the difference I think that we're trying to make. So my question is, if you would just talk a little bit about examples that you've seen where this educational revolution is happening, that we might be able to look to, read about, get to know, or do you have suggestions for how to begin in a practical way some sort of systemic educational revolution? How do we enact that revolution, or where is it being done well?
Charles, sorry to say, my question was more or less very much in sync with that. I want to just add one layer onto the question. The question remains the same. When you talked about primordialness of identity yesterday, which I really appreciated, you talked about this educational revolution should go to the other states in the Middle East as well. Now, to understand primordialness of identity, you are already going past it to say, well, this is the cultural relativized identity and this is something different. This difference, I don't think people to people there is that understanding in the Middle East yet as to what, so there's a very thin line. While it can be possible in the Moshe Dayan Center in Tel Aviv, but how do you do it in Berzeit? How do you do it in Al-Azhar? You know, that's it.
This is very sad, because what I am trying to say is that this educational revolution within the Islamic civilization or Muslim civilization is not something that should be brought in from the out. It should be inherent. And as long as Muslims are not going to create a beginning, a fresh beginning, and I can tell you that there are some. Even in Israel, we have some cooperation. For example, if I get back to your question,
Yeah.
I mean, we do support kindergarten and elementary school where both Jews and Arabs are being taught together. So it means that from the beginning, you are being educated in tandem with the other. The other is not that obscure, is not something that you don't know. You should actually be exposed to the other. Be exposed to his peculiarities, to his uniqueness. But at the same time, you come to understand that he is a human being like you. If in a kindergarten, and I didn't want to bring it in because I don't want you to think of me too pro-Israeli, because this would be actually tilt the discussion to something which is not fruitful. I could show you kindergarten in Gaza with the nanny or whatever asking the boy, 4 or 5 years old, in Arabic, what you would like to be when you are an adult or a grown up. Would you believe if I would tell you that most of them tell her that they would like to be or to become martyrs when they are grown up? So if you have that kind of a system, it would be very difficult to start dealing with that guy when he's 20 or whatever to change his mind, because he thinks that this is the mission of his life. This is why or what Muslims are for. And this is very, very sad, and this contributes a lot to the agony of the region. And this is why I say educational revolution is not something we have to bring in or inject. It's not a shot or something.
Right.
It is a very, very inherent process. And we should hope that all these people who we are familiar, in the Facebook, in the Twitter, in the chat room, whatever, when they say ISIS not representing me, don't think that ISIS speaks on behalf of me. I'm against ISIS. But if that is going to stay just a cry, sitting there in the Facebook or Twitter, and it is not being gathered to kind of a fist with which to come up with an alternative, that wouldn't help us out. I mean, this is something that I
Thank you.
I want to push Stephanie's point further. I want to push you further. So here this is an international, a room of people from all over the world. The situation in Gaza and in many schools throughout the Middle East and the Islamic world is, I would say, terrifying. They are literally, we know they are literally training children to become shaheeds. So what is there to do where there's a group of concerned scholars, teachers, people who specialize in elementary education to the university level? What can be done by an international group of committed educators who are not from the region necessarily? Some are, but many are not.
Well, first of all, I mean that, there are two things that should be checked and balanced before any, let us say, support or aid program is being channeled to the, let us say, Palestinian authorities or Syria or Iraq or Sudan or Yemen or whatever. Of course, infrastructure is very important. Job opportunities is very important. But if that would be it, we did nothing. In tandem with that, we have to deal with the textbooks, first of all. What does that mean, textbooks? What does that mean? If a guy sitting in Ramallah or Nablus, having a history class, fifth grade, for example, something that I can talk about myself, and there is a map of the Middle East, and in the state of Israel you have Palestine. There's no Israel. This is something that makes a guy, he or she, become a grown-up with this map on or in his well-intentioned his mind. We can't actually have that. It's a huge process. It's not kind of a formula. It's kind of a huge process of ups and downs. But we have to start. If we had started with that 25 or 30 years ago, we, I guess, had been in kind of a different situation nowadays. The problem is that I see no one coming up with that kind of a full-scale initiative and trying to change it up. Vice versa. What I see is widening up the gap between cultures. Globalization is being taken as something which threatens the, I would say, cultural boundaries of a unique subculture. And in order actually to make globalization be acceptable, you have to make people understand that globalization is not going for diminishing a specific subculture. So we have a lot of things actually to deal with, and this is why I said that there must be a cooperation. But when you talk to me on the immediate steps, there must be kind of, I would say, monitoring body who is going to read every word when it comes to the textbooks being written and taught there. I'm not saying what the contents are. I'm not dealing with the contents. But I would actually clean it up from any prejudices, any things that might twist the mind of a young he or she in order to create some other human beings in that sense.
Do you want to lecture or take more questions?
I'll take more.
Mike.
I hesitate to intrude into the obviously much more well-developed conversation that we've been having and will go on having, but I wanted to just make a couple of remarks in the spirit of Professor Rabi, which I think is something very, very significant and important that has been developed by him in these 2 days of conversation. The first is about a very simple, commonsensical notion which has come up over and over and over again. I'm sure it's come up in this conversation, which is the notion of the Middle East? The Middle East is, it's there. It's there. It signifies a geographical reality, which is just something we take for granted. But in fact, this is a very controversial notion. Because far from being a simple geographical identification, it turns out that the Middle East, the language, is a cultural construct of high European imperialism. And one very dramatic way of exposing this peculiarity is to get hold of, if you haven't already, a world map produced by the Chinese. The world map produced by the Chinese has the area which we call the Middle East, only in the Chinese lexicon, it's not the Middle East, it's the Middle West. Because the far west in the Chinese lexicon is Europe. And the very furthest west is here, in these little islands off the coast of Europe. And on the contrary, the Middle East in the Chinese lexicon is Hawaii. And the Far East is the United States. And it is a very important correction to look at what other people's conception of the world is in contrast to ours, and to consider the cultural meaning of that presentation of the world and the language of the regions in which it is constructed. My second contribution and comment on Professor Rabi's very, very important presentation is the notion of complexity, dynamics, and spatialization. Because all too often, a conversation takes place in the context of this kind of subject, which I call lumpen discourse. Lumpen discourse. We have somehow or other become accustomed to the notion of lumps. Lumps of people, lumps of places, lumps of the constituents in which we are discussing. So, the notion of a lump is that once you have designated it, there's no other reason to go beyond that initial designation. It just tells you everything you want to know about the subject of that lump. Yeah? So we talk about, let's say, in this conversation just now, about Iran. We talk about Israel. We talk about other national entities. And national entities are a particularly, I would say, dangerous example of the lumpen nature of our conversation. The nation state, the modern nation state, is a very peculiar notion of how the world is. A very distinguished Canadian historian named McNeill has written a little book trying to explain why it happened that out of the medieval empires, which dominated the world up to 1500 or whatever, there emerged the notion that these empires should be replaced by a new world system after the Treaty of Westphalia, called the International Nation-State System. Ever since, we have been persuaded that this is the crucial component of our understanding of the world, and so we have nation-states, and they are referred to quite simply as lumps. So, for example, Britain is a lump. But Britain actually, like all the other ideas that Rabi had, is actually far more complicated, far more complex, far more dynamic far more contested than simply Britain. And British notion of the British nation, and of course even more importantly of British nationalism, is being at this present time under challenge by the fact that there are now other components of the British Isles, the Great British Isles, which are also asserting the fact that within the British lump there are subgroups, and they are now determined to make themselves heard and felt within that single lump, and they are the Scottish nationalists, and the Welsh nationalists, and the Irish nationalists, and the Cornish nationalists, and even some ideas of the Republic of London borough named Islington. And the idea is that all these lumps or peoples or groups are determined to establish their ownership, their sovereignty. Right? This is a notion which is so amazingly contradictory, so amazingly out of order with the nature of the world we spend today, that simply taking it for given, as we have, and as we do, it seems to me is to negate Professor Rabi's point about the nature of how you try and understand the complexities and the divisions and the complications of what we're trying to deal with. Otherwise, the lumps become solidified and you never get anywhere.
Oh, thank you very much. I mean, I think that those two points are well taken, and the first of which I see really very important. Middle East is a relative, geographical, or topographical, or geocultural term. Who actually invented that? This is something that was gleaned from the, I would say, geopolitical dictionary of Great Britain or the United Kingdom. Because what the West, in the person of Great Britain, created is different definitions of the East. There was Near East. This is basically where Israel, Syria, Lebanon, and the Palestinian Authority is. There is Middle East, which basically it is where Iran and Iraq are located, and there is Far East. The paradox is that this region still depicts himself by the same notions the British had in mind 100 years ago, even more than that. So when we actually call or define ourselves as the Middle East, we are, without being aware of it, using the same name or title the world actually provided us with, the West provided us with, as kind of a territorial slice which runs actually or is being stretched between the Near East and the Far East, Middle East. We take this thing very seriously, because we should start talking, and this is something that is being developed in Israel, in Greece, in Cyprus, Malta, Tunisia, and Morocco. What we are trying to come up with is kind of a different definition by which to create kind of a regional cooperation which is based on Mediterraneanism instead of Middle Easternism. Mediterraneanism is something to be understood in line with societies and states which lie there and being exposed to the unique flavor of the Middle East. Of course, I mean, we could take some Italians with us, some French. If you are going through the Riviera, both the Italian and the French, But basically, if you come to think of that, let me just tell you that there are huge, huge cooperation systems when it comes to minerals, when it comes to natural gas, when it comes to oil, when it comes to many things, between Greece, Cyprus, Israel. I dare say beginnings of such thing when it comes to Tunisia and Morocco too, and this goes all along the Mediterranean. So this is something that we should just take into account, because this is what we have. We definitely have a Middle Eastern, a Mediterranean flavor. And this is something by which that could become kind of a common denominator, and I dare say that this is something that is going on there. Sharq Awsatism or Middle Easternism. And even the Iranians are doing that in Persian Khabari Miyane. They also use the term Middle East. It's very misleading, I agree with you. And this is just confusing so many items that we are dealing with, that maybe we should definitely talk about that too, in order not to be misled by, notions which are being gleaned from the geopolitical dictionary of the Western world. Definitely.
Okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, my question was partly asked by Stephanie, but I also wanted to add on this geopolitical position. India looks at Israel as West Asia, and it's the aspirational point, and also just to say that in the Indian diplomatic point of view, that Israel's aspiration is always with the Mediterraneans, but it is part of West Asia, and it has to deal with it.
Definitely.
So it's part, of course, the Near East in that concept, but part West Asia.
Well, let me tell you that. So if I would like to be cynical,
Yeah, go ahead.
okay, first of all, actually, we had for the first time in Israel 2 weeks ago a visit of the Indian Prime Minister.
And I was actually part of the meetings and delegations.
And I have to tell you that this is something which is really, really not only unprecedented, but this for Israel was something which was very, very instrumental. We have a lot of contacts with India, and India is kind of I won't say superpower in the making, but this is kind of a giant force, a gigantic force in terms of economy, the demography, etc. And we do think that this is something that is very, very important to further develop and further elaborate on. And I accept your definition of West Asia, because West Asia, because I know that this is something that is there. But when it comes to states of the Middle East, and when you are being enveloped by enemies, it would be kind of a tactic which had been seen there from the beginning, how to have this quantum leap forward and create collaboration with states who are, one way or the other, representing or being deduced as the enemy of the enemy. I'm not saying that India versus Pakistan.
No, I get your point, yeah. Part of this leap is also on India's part, because India is also
Exactly.
balancing act between Iran and Israel. So that leap is also there from the other end.
Exactly. Takes the stance, for example.
Absolutely, yeah.
All stance. I mean,
Most
Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, all these stans actually are becoming kind of potential allies for whoever have, let's say, anti-Turkish or anti-Iranian flavor. So I mean, sorry for being cynical, but this is how the game is being played. Israel and Azerbaijan, any Azeris? Israel and Azerbaijan and Azerbaijan is a Shi'i state.
Yeah.
And in Iran, the whole north is Azeri.
Second largest state country is Azerbaijan. I will.
Yeah. And Tabriz is the capital city of a region in Iran named Azerbaijan. So there are many Azeris in the north of Iran who can definitely say that here is my country or state, but beyond the border, I can find my people. This is a very, very Middle Eastern thing, and it is very combustible. But Azerbaijan and Israel has wonderful ties, I dare say, because it comes not only to the academia. Yeah, it is very, very, if you ask me, both of them are being benefited from these ties, and Azerbaijan actually tells us that you can be kind of a newly created state, not newly created, but actually, let's say after the termination, dissolution of the USSR, look at this, how quickly everybody is bringing in his pre-Soviet, let's say, legacy. Russia is, I mean, I would say it was a kind of, in a sudden, be reconnected to the Tsarist era. The Romanov Tsars are not unwelcomed in nowadays Russia. I was really surprised to get a Kazakh delegation, and the Kazakhs have a lot of money, so this is something that, and to get from them their new history being translated into Hebrew. It's unbelievable. Unbelievable. You are restructuring your history when you have, oh, a nice guy coming from Tel Aviv University.
This is Professor Lucy Shane, who will be speaking tomorrow.
I will
Welcome,
just-
Yossi.
So what I would say is that this is something which is definitely right to the point. Again, my enemy's enemy, I won't put it that way because it's too cynical. But I have to tell you that this is part of the game which is being played, and we have to take it into account. The other thing that I mentioned before, try to think of that. Middle Easternism is something that is yet to be melted, if at all. What I think that Mediterraneanism is something that we see the beginnings of it when it comes to states like Greece, like Cyprus, Malta, and I also, since I am very well connected with people from the Maghreb, I can say that Tunisia, which tends to be the exception to the rule when it comes to the Arab Spring, because there is kind of a parliamentary machinery which goes on, and it tells you that there might be kind of exception to the rule when it comes to the Arab Spring. It would be Tunisia, of course, monarchical Morocco. These are states that are being mentioned as the moderate states, maybe pro-Western states in the Middle East, Sunni moderate camp, and Israel functionally, and also I would say mechanically, could definitely be cooperated with. So this is something that definitely should be reckoned with.
So, hold on, can people motion to me who would like to ask a question?
Should I start? I was wondering how your position is on the deal, the nuclear deal between Iran and the Western countries. Do you think that there is a chance that this could inhibit nuclear weapons of Iran and nuclear program?
Well, I mean, you know, everybody knows that Iran goes nuclear. That's for sure. What the deal actually is about, and this is actually to quote even the Americans who were pretty happy with this deal, is that we are going to postpone the, let us say, creation of establishment of nukes in Iran in 10 to 15 years. That's the deal. The problem is with that deal is that it legitimized Iran and enabled Iran to start dealing with some other dimensions of its industry without having a word of criticism coming from the 5+1. And I'm talking about the ballistic missiles and definitely the support of terror groups all over the region. So this is something that was cynically and cunningly used by Iran in order to bolster its position in the region. And again, this is why I even say, while looking at this map, that it is almost, Iran is almost present in every area when it comes to the Middle East. And if there is something that really people in the Middle East are afraid of, I don't know if it works, but let me just show you that. Just think of that, what we have here, again, from Baghdad to Basra, this is what we called before Shi'istan, remember? I mean, you wouldn't be surprised if I would tell you that pro-Shiite militias, titled as Al-Hashd al-Sha'bi, the popular gathering, were created in parallel to the Shi'i army or the Iraqi army, so to speak. And they are very, very independent in their course and routes throughout Iraq, and they are subordinated to the, I would say, pro-Iranian figures who are to be actually found in Iraq. Half of the industry of Iraq is being controlled by Iranian-owned companies. Electricity, cars, whatever. But the Iranians, as I said before, are very shrewd, much smarter than anybody else in the region, very cynical. And this is why, this is now the question, are they going to have kind of an axis to be seen here, which is going to be by the merging of pro-Iranian militias here and pro-Iranian militias here? This is the main question, because what Iran thinks of in the post-ISIS era is to have this territorial vacuum being capitalized on by creating this axis running from the Mediterranean to the head of the Persian Gulf. As we said before, actually Arabs depicted that as Al-Hilal al-Shi'i, which is the Shiite crescent, and this is something that also Mubarak and King Abdullah of Jordan have noted already in 2004, 2005. I mean, it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy, I mean, if I would say. I mean, this is Iran is everywhere, and they managed to just use them and capitalize on it. Is that?
Yeah, just a short follow-up. What about the Hezbollah at the border of Israel? What is the situation right now? We have an agreement between the Russians and the United States do you think this would make it more likely that there start a war between Hezbollah and Israel in the next few years? Let's say.
Well, let's talk about that too. This is what we call the Trump-Putin agreement.
Yeah.
It has to do with southwest Syria, especially, I mean, specifically when it comes to Israel, what counts is what's going on in the Golan Heights, okay? Remember that? Okay, what the Iranians have in mind, actually together with Hezbollah, is to get closer to the Syrian Golan, and create kind of a stronghold here that would extend the border with Israel through Lebanon and the Golan. This would actually create a lot of room for maneuver for Iran actually to harass and tease Israel when it is needed in order actually to change the atmosphere or to divert attention from this to that. So, Hezbollah is definitely an Iranian proxy. as we said before, when the Iranians actually created their Pasdaran, the Revolutionary Guard, the first quantum leap to be made by them was jumping from here to the other side of the region, and Lebanon was chosen deliberately as kind of a weak link where you can just actually appropriate Shiite Arabs local. By the way, all of them were trained in either Najaf or Karbala, the sacred Shiite cities in Iraq. And even Nasrallah and Mossavi, the leaders of Hezbollah, are kind of disciples of Ayatollah Khomeini at the time when he was basically on exile before the revolution. So this is something which is very, very interesting. But Hezbollah, Party of God, has been given kind of an instruction to cross the border and to take part in a massacre of many, many Sunni Syrians in a city named Qusayr here 2 years ago. You know, if you ask me, I don't have, at times you entertain yourself and play with history. I don't know if you are familiar with the Karbala massacre. Are you Karbala is kind of a massacre that was inflicted upon Shiites who found shelter and refuge in the city of Karbala in Iraq. This was to be called later on Al-Ashura Memory Day, and this is something that was to become very instrumental in understanding the Shi'i ethos of suffering and sacrifice and all that stuff. If we are coming up with that, what happened in Qusayr 2 years ago, in my opinion, years to come, is going to be memorized as a parallel to Karbala, Shi'i Karbala. It would be Sunni Qusayr. So it is not that we're going to solve all the problems. It is a multi-layered conflict. And with the progress of time, things are becoming much more heavier than they were before. It is not that somebody is actually coming up with a real, let's say, well-articulated and fostered program by which to ease tensions. Tensions is growing higher, higher and higher and higher. And things, people bear the memory of what happened to their parents, to their sisters, and this hostility runs all over the place. So in my opinion, it got out of control because the Western mind thinks in terms of how to solve it out, because I have to shift this slice of territory here, there, let's have the boundary here and there. Well, this is very mechanical. If you don't deal with the existential stuff, culture, religion, language, etc., you get a lot behind, and this is something that we have to just bear in mind.
Thank you very much. Incredibly interesting, everything that you say, as always. And a quick follow-up about everything that you said. I'm quite confused about your main, I think, a point of understanding the situation right now. At the present, having said that Iran will have nuclear weapons, who should be most concerned of that, Israel or Saudi Arabia?
Both of them. Egypt too. The thing is that everybody is going to go nuclear, and then we'll have, maybe we'll have a much more stable Middle East, because when everybody is nuclear, every player would have kind of a second thought because he's harming the other, because otherwise everybody, is going to be demolished by everybody. So I don't know, this is kind of Armageddon, but I don't want to get into apocalyptical visions. I think that everybody will go nuclear. I don't see any possibility of Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Turkey allow themselves becoming kind of states to be used and abused by a nuclear Iran. You know, they say that Israel is a nuclear state. Okay? What Iran had in mind when actually developing nuclear abilities is to have mano a mano, as they say. You know, there are two huge players in the Middle East, Israel and Iran. The Arab fold in the middle is going to be crushed, and they are going to become the vassals of the Persians, as history actually dictated from the beginning. It's a blend of imagination, politics, and geopolitical consideration. It is very, very difficult to have a laboratory which is very, very clean and dealing with only geopolitical issues. You know, culture, twisted perceptions, my back of the mind, or the back of the mind, are being actually infiltrated one way or the other to every other dimension of our life. And this is something that, again, should be taken into account.
Just to follow up with David, so far the superpowers and the nuclear weapons, the states with nuclear weapons, you can make the argument are materialist, rationalist societies. What are the implications of regimes that have one foot in the metaphysical world, who actually believe that it's a mitzvah to wipe out certain groups of people, that they're obligated to do so? They have a nuclear weapon, and how does Europe and the other, Russia, China, United States, allow this to evolve? They don't understand what
Well, Charles,
is at risk.
if you ask me if there is a lesson to be learned from what happened in the recent years in the Middle East, is that you cannot count on what the world is saying or wishing to have. You cannot count on that because, again, it's very cynical. It doesn't matter what he or she said at a certain stage. You know, you have to count on yourself. This is the message that we gleaned from the recent developments in the Middle East. Now, frankly, if you ask me if Iran is going to attack Israel, I'm not sure about that because Iran is not foolish, as I said. They are very clever. But it doesn't matter if I think so or you think so. The average Israeli or the Jewish psyche would dictate kind of rhythm that would make many, many people that Iran is, you know, able to do so. It is doable when it is nuclear. And here comes the thing, you know, I mean, many, many wars in the Middle East were actually the byproduct of what I call twisted perception. Why should I wait? Anyway, he's going to attack me. So why won't I have the first step or the initiative? This is something that you have actually to get closer to if you would like to really, really analyze the Middle East. Twisted perceptions. Twisted perception. Dehumanizing the other. And creating something which is very problematic. And by the way, when it comes to Iran, it wouldn't be that difficult because again, when we are quoting Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, he doesn't look at Israel as a bunch of human beings. And this is not my interpretation, this is exactly what he says. By the way, it's the same actually attitude when he looks or speaks about the Americans. He says that in Persian in kind of a very, very clear and blunt way. This is a bill which is definitely kind of the ultimate evil. When you talk about, or that way, about the other, and basically when you deal with anti-Semitism, much of the criticism is not being built on, let's say, rational consideration. Of course, actually, Jews in Europe when it comes to the classic anti-Semitism, were being looked at as too successful, economically speaking, which made many others less successful, let's put it that way, or deprived. You are not going actually to base your enmity or hostility on things that has to do with materialism. You have to come up with things that are well entrenched in the mind of the people, be merged with their national or other ethos, and this is how actually the protocols of the elders of Zion was to be compiled. What the Iranians are doing is exactly the same. By the way, the protocols have been translated into Persian, and this can be achieved for free in every Iranian market in Tehran and Asfahan, for free. And if you go through the protocols, you could see actually how things actually were fostered here. Jews are not something to be dealt with, and this is basically what Ayatollah Khomeini is in rational terms. Why? They are the ultimate evil. They are satanic. And you can understand Jews and Americans only, and again, this is not my interpretation, this is exactly what he says. You can understand them only if you are familiar with the way Satan conducts his or plays his conduct. Only then. Think of that. As we said before, if you go through the Quran, Satan is his way is very convoluted. It's very difficult for a regular human being actually to even follow the way Satan thinks and acts. So only us really have an idea, Ayatollahs, what Israel, they don't call it Israel, of course, I don't. It's the Zionist entity, or the United States are comprised of. So when it comes to that field, show me actually what you are coming up with in order to understand that. Because you will have many difficulties actually to translate all these geopolitical happenings or eventualities, actualities, without getting actually kind of a cultural dimension or lens through which to look at what's going on.
So we have a bunch of questions, just to let you know. So we'll go.
So let's make it short, you mean?
Yeah. Concise questions and just responses if you can, because we have a lot.
Yeah, sure.
Easier than mine.
Sure.
We touched on the idea of the nuclear deal that was speaking about. It was the Obama administration and on the 4 or the 6 nuclear.
5+1. Yeah.
And it was supposed to be one that wasn't going to get into other issues. They were going to only talk about the nuclear deal.
Mm-hmm.
But in the end, the Iranians still have their Holocaust denial industry. And
less conspicuous, I would say, after Ahmadinejad. Rouhani actually and Javad Zarif do not talk that way in recent years because they have to speak in Western terms when it comes to Americans and Europeans, and this enables the deal. Yes, sure.
okay, they still have
Ayatollahs would speak that way. People of the Pastaran, Revolutionary Guards, Qasem Soleimani would speak that way, definitely.
So, but they still have the ideology and the purpose to destroy Israel. And so the question is, how could this have happened? That the Western powers are on the record as giving the Iranians a green light. And isn't that the most obvious form of anti-Semitism?
Well, you know, this is a very tough question because, you know, if you go through the Cairo speech of Obama, you would see that he's being influenced by kind of a beehive that was to say one way or the other that Iran should be talked to. I won't say further, maybe Yossi could elaborate on that. I mean, he's an expert on the policy of the United States, and I guess he has a lot to do about it. But as I understood from following the Iranian state of mind, it became a golden opportunity because there a guy who really thought that stabilizing the Middle East is something you cannot achieve without Iran, period. Now let's see what we are doing. If I'm going actually to just even graphically analyze the Cairo speech, you would see actually the peace treaty between Palestinians and Israelis in Syria. We're going to stabilize Iran. We're going to explain Iran why it would be better for its interest to conform or confirm our appeasement and create sort of an agreement that would both of us, actually everybody is going to be benefited. Remember that from for Obama administration as well as the Trump administration, the fiercest enemy was Qaeda/ISIS. Qaeda 9/11 and ISIS thereafter when it comes to Trump. I think that, and again, this is kind of a culture. I didn't speak about that yet, but try to think how much experience you have equipped. If you have a state, which is also a deep culture, Iran, for almost 3 millennia, and you have 13 to 15 immediate neighbors. The amount of diplomatic skills history provided you with by the simple fact that you are a creature who have been living for 3,000 years with so many. They are the most able negotiators all over the world. They know how to negotiate, they are very clever. And frankly, when I do talk to some diplomats in Israel, and I try actually to give them an idea on how to deal with the Middle East, the Iranian model on how to negotiate becomes something to follow. I can't actually, explain it because this is not scientific. But since I am 25% Iranian, I can tell you that I have some family members who could sell, how do you say that, ice to the Eskimo? Really like that. So I wish you actually, I beg you to understand that because it has to do with the culture. And the Iranians definitely capitalized on that. They saw the benefits of Obama's policy. They concluded this agreement and they knew that they are going to get immunity when it comes to the other dimensions. And by the way, I have many friends who are Iranians. When I'm talking about Iran, I have to say here, and this is a very important distinction. Iran is a state of 80 million people. Most Iranians are very young. They have many problems with old people who are not getting the social welfare in the state. There are many problems that we don't have the time to even delve into that. But remember that young people in Iran are not able to marry their beloved one and get an apartment because they don't have money to do that. so many are staying with their family, not being getting married. This is something which constitutes a break with tradition. It's not a healthy, let us say, process when it comes to the society. So it goes on, and I agree with you, but this distinction have to be made. It's not that all Iranians would like actually to demolish Israel, not at all. I'm talking about Ayatollahs, I'm talking about revolutionary guards, I'm talking about those who have the grip over, I would say, the economy and politics in Iran, and they, unfortunately, are dictating the rhythm. There was kind of an attempt to have an Arab Spring in Iran, or Iranian Spring, in 2009. If you remember, actually, the Green Movement, well, you saw how the Pasdara, how the Revolutionary Guard were cracking down on these people. There is no opposition in Iran, not an organized opposition. So they feel pretty safe as those Ayatollahs, and whenever actually they have a president which is not fit for their grand design, they would replace him with another one.
Excuse me. There's Larry, Rabi, and then Dina.
Before the break, I did something we asked me to ask you publicly, and that was about this notion of the Magna Carta. And I wanted to connect that because you also mentioned that the West deals with this from a materialistic point of view rather than an existential point of view. Is that connected to this notion of the West being bound by the Magna Carta in a way that, how does that work?
Indirectly, what I meant is, and I think that Charles actually pointed to that when he spoke about what were the Canadian responses to what happened in the parliament. You know, for years, actually, France and other West European states, and Obama included, refrained from coming up with the slogan of Islamic terrorism. Why? Because if you are going to use that, by the way, as I heard, this is something that goes against the French Constitution. So you are not allowed by law to speak that way because you are generalizing all of them and turn them into terrorists, which we can understand what's the problem with that is. But I would say that, and again, when Theresa May saying that enough is enough, you ask yourself, what does that mean? What does that mean, enough is enough? That from now on, we are going to violate the basic civic rights of every Muslim in the United Kingdom? Again, I'm asking myself, are we going to search in their houses in London, in Bayswater, whatever? No. Because when you are dealing with this Magna Carta, you have to take into account that the West, by his nature being, as the West or neoliberal ideologies and that stuff, you cannot change bluntly your modus operandi before you are going through a tunnel of accommodation when it comes to your basic values. What civic rights are, what citizenship is, how should we relate to our state nation or our nation? And again, this is why I think that what ISIS has managed to do, while actually spreading out the rumor or the virus, is to make many, many Europeans to ask about themselves questions that haven't been questioned before because of the atrocities. So who is the enemy? As becoming kind of a question where the reply is quite different from what we had to think or we had to believe in before that. So this is something that it goes in the mind of many, many Western civilizations. I can't actually tell you at a certain stage where does it stand. But I know that if, and again, I mean, Yossi could definitely talk about that better than me, but I dare say even not being an expert of United States or American politics, but when Trump is saying that we shall make America great again, this is something that makes Americans who feel deprived for many reasons under Obama or in America, in the United States, 2017, then why not? Why won't we have something else? Maybe making America greater again is to bring us back to the good position we used to be decades before, or something like that. It is based on me and the other. It is based on the enmity to the other and the, let us say, culturalism which is coming to the fore and makes everybody thinks of himself very, very tied up to his primordial identity. This is why I think the Jews, one way or the other, would find themselves more Jewish, even if they don't want, in years to come, in the 21st century. The same goes to Armenians, the same goes to Gypsies, the same goes to some other species.
So we have Rabi then.
Of course, thank you for being here with us for second day. I will try to make my position very brief and direct. Now we're watching a new alliance at the region between Saudi Arabia and Israel and Egypt also, to point Iranian threat. Recently, United States signed a lot of contract to sell Saudi Arabia a lot of high advanced on high-tech weapons. I heard that inside Israel there is a big firm in Saudi Arabia after solving the Iranian dilemma, maybe uses this weapons against Israel. What's the guarantee that Saudi Arabia will not use this high-tech?
There is no guarantee.
Oh,
No guarantee at all. This is why Israelis are. But you don't know what you fear from first. You know, human beings actually tend to deal with the immediate problem. And the immediate problem is Iran. And what Trump actually had been done or had been doing in the Middle East is a simple thing. He just let the Saudis actually get the feeling that we are getting back to business as usual. And the bad 8 years of Mr. Obama had gone. And we are not going to tango with Iran anymore, but with you, the Saudis, as was the case in the 20th century. Now, this is exactly how Saudi Arabia likes America. Don't ask us about human rights. Don't talk us about women's rights. We give you the money, and you protect us and provide immunity, ammunition or weaponry. Now, when it comes to Israel, you know, we Israelis tend to think that we can control everything, but nowadays, Israel and Israelis definitely realize of how complicated the region has become, how so many things are much beyond the scope of Israel's control, and this is why I said, one time Syria is a real epidemic thing, but Israel actually confines itself only to the Golan Heights because this is something which has to do with the immediate concern of Israel. What would happen in the larger slices, territorial slices of the middle, who knows? Who knows? But this is something actually to be seen. It remains to be seen. By the way, we have, and you have, Egyptians too. I know that you are not that happy with this arms deal that was concocted with Saudi Arabia. But you know, Trump has his own, shall we call it strategy? Imagination? Who knows what Trump's actually have in mind? I can just say one thing when it comes to Trump, and this is in his favor. I have to tell you that while looking at the Arab, let's say, virtual media, while following, let's say, even leaders of the Arab fold, I get the feeling that everybody is afraid of Trump. if when Obama was here, everybody was pretty independent and felt safe to have its independence because Obama, what may come, wouldn't use actually force or military force. Now it seems that in Washington there is a guy who is carrying, as the aphorism says, a big stick. And he doesn't speak softly and nicely. So this is something I dare say in the Middle East with this political culture is being given much attention because who knows what to expect if and when. And this is something which is...
Could I add something about Trump? Yesterday he received Saad al-Hariri, Lebanese Prime Minister, and he said Lebanon is very important ally to and front line combating ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and Hezbollah. Even Hezbollah is a member in the Lebanese cabinet. He has no idea about politics.
No, I mean, I don't expect him actually. I mean, you know, it is becoming so turbulent in the Middle East that even those who know something about the Middle East now know nothing, let alone somebody who knew nothing from the beginning.
Okay, so we have Dina and then Carl.
Thank you. I would like to ask you a question about Turkey, if you don't mind. After the Qatar crisis, it became even more clear that the Muslim Brotherhood is being financed not only by Qatar, but of course by Turkey. I'm talking about all kinds of financing and all kinds of investments. So would you say, what has to happen in your opinion so that Saudi Arabia will see in Turkey, let's say, an aim for, in the way it sees Iran, let's say?
There is an ambivalency here, I mean, when it comes to Saudi Arabia and Turkey, because Turkey is a Sunni state, but it supports the Muslim Brothers, which happen to be the enemies of Egypt and Saudi Arabia. But Turkey also is a counterbalance to Iran. So you can't have it all. This is what every player in the Middle East has learned. You can't have it all. So if you try to imagine what we have in mind while dealing with the geopolitical chessboard, try to think that way. Everybody is moving toward where he thinks the best spot is. You don't have icebergs. You don't have blocks. You have bits and pieces in this lake called the Middle East. And more often than not, you have shifting alliances. Day by day, ad hoc alliances. But that's the rule of the game now. So, I think that, again, we know what Erdogan has in mind. Erdogan would like to be the counterbalance to Iran. If Iran is introducing itself as the leader of the Shi'i camp, and now we have the post-ISIS era, and there is a question, who is going to run this region? Unfortunately for Erdogan, Trump decided to support the Syrian Kurdish, which are members of the PKK. The PKK is kind of an underground Kurdish movement who is saboteuring in Turkey. So if the Americans are supporting them and they are against me, I am not happy with what Trump has just done. And if Trump is also dancing with Saudi Arabia and actually chose Saudi Arabia to be the Sunni leader, so to speak, of the Middle East, Turkey is at bay. So Turkey is at a position by which to damage and harm every Sunni bloc that is going actually to make Turkey a second driver. So Turkey is going with Hamas, Muslim Brothers, Qatar, and Qatar of course is kind of, you know, it's so tiny that we shouldn't actually talk too much about that, but it's very noisy. And they rich, they had Al Jazeera, they actually bought and acquired, so to speak, by the money, the right to actually host the Mondial Games in 2022. You know, the one who had been to Doha, and I have been there several times, it's something which should be understood in it's a different chapter, really. I tried to talk to you while dealing yesterday about Saudi Arabia with the bunch of families that you can find them, and the fact that the nation is not something that has, you know, kind of a breakthrough from a certain situation to nationalism. There is no Saudi nationalism. It is kind of an amalgam of, let's say, blood ties and economic benefits into marriage of some main families, and family here is not a family in the Western sense of the word. For example, how many members do we have when it comes to the Saudi royal family?
Hundreds.
Hundreds?
Thousands.
Thousands? Tens of thousands. Tens of thousands. Actually, we have 12,000 princes and 20,000 women princesses. So, I mean, if you come to think of that, this is very, very... So, what Erdogan is going to do, he's going to hamper everything until he's going to be respected, because after all, he is the best. And you cannot ignore him, because he is a descendant of the Ottoman Empire, he's a follower of the great empire, and if there is kind of a thought to rephrase the Middle East, or refoster the geopolitical chessboard, and get somebody who deserves to be there, it should be only the Sultan Erdogan.
Thank you.
Thank you, Uzi, for an amazing discourse. I'm wondering about what you said earlier about Trump, about his being feared, you know, in many places around the world. I'm coming from the perspective of an American who's seeing some of Trump's hard support soften even among his base, and his popularity continuing to grow. That is on the domestic front, and then also looking globally, especially in the West, how he appeared to be, at least a lot of the media reported that he was shunned at G20, and I mean, I think Britain didn't want, there had been a movement here not to have him come here unless he embarrassed the Queen. So I mean, he's seen as weak in some ways. So I'm just wondering whether, and I know it's hard to predict the future, but can you anticipate, given the way the crises are surrounding Trump now, in terms of the whole kind of Russiagate situation, should the United States end up in a state of paralysis, kind of geopolitically over the next, say, 6 months or so, as this investigation?
You know, since I am a dear friend and fully well aware of the skills of the next presenter here, which sits there, Professor Yossi Shine, and he is a real expert in that. Is that I won't talk about Trump too much, because I'm not an expert of Trump. I don't know if there is, but I'm not, definitely. But I can tell you how the Arab states are treating or referring to what actually Trump is. And this is something that, again, I am gleaning from the virtual media, from the assessments being made by politicians and community leaders, And I get the feeling that it is better actually not to, how do you say that, irritate this guy? How not to get complicated with him on grounds of this or that? Because everybody is practicing the art of fence sitting. By the way, they do look at what Trump is going to do with North Korea. I have to tell you that. Again, I mean, this is what I see in their stuff. And you know, Trump is delivering, I don't know, Yossi would talk about that. But in North Korea, we had quite a strange guy actually running the business there. Who knows what he has in mind? Who knows what Trump has in mind? You can get everything here. And I would say that for many, many Middle Easterners, it is becoming sort of a litmus test by which actually to measure things when it comes to the new America under Trump. The most effective thing that I can think about is what we call the post-truth era. I mean, Trump, brought in, I don't know if it was deliberately or not, but, you know, the alternative facts, well, you have facts, I have alternative facts, by which to totally differently or interpret what you have now. Listen, I wish I could have that. I have it here. I don't know if Ira, you can just turn it into something that could be visible. It's an audiovisual stuff. There is a lady sitting or standing in Temple Mount and being asked by a European journalist about what happened in Temple Mount. First of all, she says that we are here in order to protect our noble mosque, and the Saudi tradition and everything is acceptable. But then he asked her, but you have to understand, the Israeli government is coming up with magnetometers, بوابات electricity. Magnetometer is kind of an electronic gates through which to go through, actually, through the area of Temple Mount. And he asked her, there was an atrocity here. 2 Israeli soldiers were massacred by saboteurs, coming, by the way, from inside Israel. It was Israeli-Palestinians, by the way. Never mind, we're going to leave that. And he speaks to and say, but there was an atrocity. And she says, no, it's just rumors. It's just a conspiracy. She ended up with saying that basically the police killed the 2 policemen in order to accuse Palestinian Israelis and blaming them, put the blame on them for the atrocity. Now she is so well convinced of that. She is not ready to even listen to any other story that could tell you how combustible and fragile the world we are living in is. I can definitely poison the mind of people with this post-truth, alternative facts, and I'm going to talk to people not via the national press, but via the internet. It is getting out of control, guys. And again, the only thing by which to bring the horses back is educational revolution. People have to take control and be responsible about what they say, about the way they are spreading the rumors, so to speak. And we all should remember that what is being learned in textbooks, what is being said while in kindergarten, the way people's mind is being shaped in childhood, this is it. Later on, it would be very, very difficult to change things. So this is why there is a wake-up call here. I doubt whether we have the ability to really come up with a fresh change.
So we have 5 minutes left, so I'm going to collect 2 questions, 2 remaining questions. Daniel and...
Professor, is there any chance that Iran will change in the near future? I mean, in the age of social media, it's not possible anymore to protect the youth from Western influences. After the Iran deal, there is...
I agree with you, but here is the cleverness of Iran. Because they know what you say, they would open up actually the political system and bring in a candidate like Hassan Rouhani, who is not the cup of tea of the Ayatollahs, in order to appease the public and let him speak about the benefits of the nuclear deal and create very many promises for bettering the economic situation in Iran, which is not the case here. There is just a slight improvement. Okay? So they are playing with the numbers and the cards. It is kind of a theater where you have a marionette puppets all over the place, and Ayatollahs are moving them time and again in line or in accordance with their basic understandings of what should reality be.
So, for many years, Turkey and Israel had the golden age of this relationship. And then, with Erdogan's ascent to power, it's slowly been basically decreasing. So this morning he came out and said that Israel's removal of these nanometers was not enough, and basically the Muslim world needs to step up and do something with the Temple Mount. So where do you envision Turkish-Israeli relations going in the next
Well, I
years?
mean, we have the best relation when it comes to economy, unprecedented. Cultural ties, I can say that we have a very good relationship with Turkish certain universities. But, you know, the guy, again, when it comes to a crossroads, a public crossroads, he would definitely, I would say, hit Israel publicly in order to leave behind the impression that he is still in square one, anti-Israeli, supportive of the Palestinians, deserved to be introduced as the great champion of the Sunni war. So here in Israel, what Israel should do, you know, is to say, having the benefits of that agreement, economically and culturally speaking, but at the same time be ready to get some slappers at the face from this guy. Because he is going to attack Israel whenever it comes to the dimension of religious / cultural ties. Cultural ties, I don't mean actually in tourists coming from Israel to Turkey, etc. I mean, it's basically Israel to Turkey. But culture, I mean that, you know, when he is able to come up with the, let us say, paranoia of Israelis abusing Muslims and Palestinians, Israeli damaging, let's say, the sacred shrines of Islam, he would try to capitalize on and make a profitable, I would say, gain in order to better position himself in this ever-changing region. So, you know, this is not a surprise anymore. Israelis thought that if they are going to agree with him on this and that, you know, there was the Marmara thing, he got compensated, whatever he thought. I mean, his lost respect and honor actually were actually reimbursed, so to speak. But that worked out. This guy, as long as he is there, this is exactly what you're gonna get from him. If you think of changing his mind or get another Erdogan, you can't do that. I know actually where Erdogan actually acquired his education. His rabbi, so to speak, quote unquote, was Arbakan, which is kind of a fundamentalist, anti-Semitic Islamist. And I can, again, I know where this guy comes from. I know how he was educated. What was his Bible, so to speak? Jews are kind of a bother when it comes to the world civilizations. So they should be marginalized, they should be monitored, they are not to be trusted, and this is not something that I can explain logically. Economy, let's do it with them, they are good in that. Culture here and there, let's do it with them. But when it comes to politics, and when it comes to be introduced as somebody who has good connections with Jews, this goes against his future vision. And again, when I was last year in the United States in the MESA conference, and as always in the MESA conference, actually MESA is a body that Charles speak better than me actually speak about. They are definitely not interested in what I said here. What I said here is just kind of an attempt to twist the picture. What they would say is still, the problem is, exactly. And they're not going to change it. Even if the whole world is going to be changed upside down, they're gonna stick to the notion, cherchez Israel. So what I'm trying to say here is that when I talked about Iran and Israel, differently put, I ended up my dissertation saying, because many people ask, why Iran? I'm not, maybe I said it yesterday, I don't know. But, so forgive me if I am repeating myself, but too many words. What we have here is, I ended up my presentation because somebody asked me, so, what is that? Why Iran is investing so much in anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism? And here is the picture. In the Middle East, nobody can characterize the self, 2 minutes, without actually characterizing the other. So, Shi'i wouldn't understand himself if you are not going to put in front of him a Sunni guy, and vice versa. In order to understand what Islamic Iran is, you have to have a sort of an Israel in front of your eyes. So I ended my presentation with the words, if Israel had not existed, it would have been necessary for the Islamic Republic of Iran to invent such a state. Think of that. The twisted perception thing, the way I understand and dehumanize the other, Israel has become the scapegoat of all these players and movements. That one, whatever the circumstances are, have that kind of a problem to deal with. The thing is, on top of what I said, they can keep accusing Israel, even if they know that Israel is not to be blamed for the mess in the Middle East. So geopolitically speaking, there is a huge change. Behind the scenes, Israel is more than welcome. Everybody talks with Israel, everybody cooperates with Israel. But when you are publicly dancing in the square of the city, it is better that your partner wouldn't be Israel.
Thanks for your wisdom. It's really a real privilege that you're here. Really, you're
Thank you. It's a
leading
pleasure.
voice as an analyst on this conversation.
Pleasure.